pull up a chair and join us at the Energy Roundtable.
Welcome to the Energy Roundtable. This is actually the first time that I'm taking Matt's place as the host of this particular show. Although, of course, many of our listeners have heard me on host Energy. I was going to say Energy News. There is another medium, Energy Radio, the Energy Radio podcast in the past. But as many of our listeners know, I am approaching the end of my pregnancy and will be taking some time off over the next couple of weeks. So I wanted to introduce my temporary replacement. At least I think he's my temporary replacement. Maybe he's eager to take over full time. And Matt's new co-host moving forward over the next couple of weeks, Bill Davidson, CM's Director of Engineering. Welcome, Bill, to the Energy Roundtable.
Well, I appreciate it. Thanks for the invite, and I'm happy to be here.
Good. Awesome. Well, we're looking forward to having you on the show and looking forward to you taking my place, especially as it relates to the debate side of things, because I've been on a losing streak here. And so I was really hoping to introduce you today, do one news article, and then have you go against Matt. And I thought I was really looking forward to that extra bit of entertainment. But anyways, it won't happen before I leave, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But as many of our listeners know, what we basically do is review 2 energy articles each as a way to, of course, educate our listeners. And we hopefully are providing some entertainment along the way. And then our content specialist, Mark Charbonneau, comes back on and basically leads our Faceoff, which is a debate topic on really any genre or any topic that is not necessarily energy related. And then he gets to rate who argues the pro or the con side more successfully. So with that, why don't we start? Bill, do you know the general kind of cadence in terms of starting the articles? Like you'll talk about the where you got the article from, the title, and then just kind of hop right in and kind of review the article. Do you want to go first or?
Sure, I'll go first. And now that you've explained it, I completely get it. No, in fact, I did listen to a little bit of your history there. So I think maybe the last 4 or 5 episodes. So I got a general idea.
Oh, okay, good. Great.
Cool. And you did find the debates, by the way. So.
Why, thank you.
I don't know if I agree with Mark's judgments there, but anyway.
Oh, okay.
This will be your last time on the show, just so you know.
Thanks, Mark. All right, so jumping into it, I think probably most people know of that February 28th, Ipcc released their second part of their 6th assessment report. It's a little confusing, but the 6th assessment report, and that's the 6th since they started up in 1988. It's the second part. There was one back in August of last year, and then there's 2 more coming this year in April and October. This report took 7 years. The report was signed off by 195 countries, and it's based on around 34,000 studies.
Wow.
Yeah. So I guess the takeaway major takeaway from the first part from last year was something we've heard before, but basically climate change is unequivocally caused by human actions. We have unprecedented changes, and some of these are becoming irreversible. That's bad news. All of this is a bit of a downer, but anyway, we still should talk about it. The next ones in April and October, they will cover ways to cut greenhouse gas emissions. That's the one in April, and then the one in October is basically a summary for the UN COP27 climate summit that's going to be in Egypt.
Okay.
Yep. And as this article points out, I apologize, I didn't do what I said I was going to do, which was start off by saying where to get the article from. It's from The Guardian, and here's the headline. The headline is IPCC issues bleakest warning yet, in quotes, on impacts of climate breakdown, which obviously sounds pretty concerning. And I was going to say that what this part of this article points out is that this actually might be, given how long it takes to generate these reports, this may be the last report to be published while there's still any time to do anything about it. Okay. So regarding this part of the report that just came out, it starts off with this quote: "The scientific evidence is unequivocal Climate change is a threat to human well-being and the health of the planet. Any further delay in concerted global action will miss a brief and rapidly closing window to secure a livable future. And that's from Hans Otto Portner. He's a co-chair of Working Group 2 on the IPCC. The 4 different sections are called working groups. So basically, some damage is irreversible at this point, but the report is clear that there is still an opportunity to turn things around. But the real problem that you see over and over again here is that we're simply not on that road to recovery at the moment. Now, as you probably know, it was a previous goal to keep the global rise in temperature to 1.5 Celsius above pre-industrial, and we're currently at about 1.1. But with our current emission trends, this just isn't going to happen, keeping it to 5. So, and that 1.5 Celsius number seems arbitrary, but it was picked in the past because it's roughly where you start to get the truly irreversible effects. And you also get the start of this cascading where the warming is amplified. And this is from a major increase in wildfires, mass die-offs of trees, the drying of peatlands. And these are all events that release even more carbon into the air. So you get that crazy feedback loop. I just wanted to read some key points that came out of the article. Remember, this report is like the report itself is like 3,600 pages. So I'm not reading it. I'm glad they were able to take these points out. I'll read them real quick here. Everyone is affected, with no inhabited region escaping dire impacts from rising temperatures and increasingly extreme weather. About half of the global population, between 3.3 billion and 3.6 billion people, live in areas of, quote, highly vulnerable to climate change. Millions of people face food and water shortages owing to climate change, even at current levels of heating. Mass die-offs of species, from trees to corals, are already underway. 1.5 C above pre-industrial levels, which I just talked about, constitutes a critical level beyond which the impacts of the climate crisis accelerate strongly, and some become irreversible, as I said before. Coastal areas around the globe and small low-lying islands face inundation at temperatures rising at more than 1.5 C. And also key ecosystems are losing their ability to absorb carbon dioxide. And this is turning them from carbon sinks into carbon sources. Now, some countries had agreed to conserve 30% of the Earth's land, but conserving half may be necessary to restore the ability of natural ecosystems to cope with the damage wreaked on them. And I did read a little bit about that, and it's basically, it depends on where you are, but it could be anywhere from 30 to 50. But the point is that 30 is not going to be enough.
Right.
Yeah. The situation for small islands is particularly worrisome. They were quoting in the article a guy called Walton Webson. He's the chair of the Alliance of Small Island States. He pointed out that key milestone of 1.5, it doesn't seem realistic at this point. And we needed to have, in order to keep that 1.5, we would have had to have halved, that is cut in half, the CO2 emissions by 2030. And it just doesn't seem to be happening. So, and he's referring to the findings in the report as, quote, cataclysmic. And then the article kind of ends with talking about other knock-on effects of climate change beyond the flooding and starvation and poverty, and that there are human conflicts that will inevitably rise from them. Now, of course, that one's hard to predict, but it does seem like it's going to be a factor that causes everyone more misery in the long run. Now, there was one bit of good news that I read outside of this particular article, and that is that one change from previous reports is that was talking about how long it would take to stop the warming after the CO2 emissions stop in the future, because in the past we had been saying that was basically decades, 40 to 50 years, and now they're saying it's probably more like 1 decade, so like 10 years once we stop. That's not reversing. Yeah, reversing still hundreds or thousands of years type of thing, right? In that scale. But at least that is a little bit of good news. So
that is some good news. Well, that was some great coverage, and I do have a follow-up question for you, in case our listeners want to know, what does IPCC stand for?
International Panel for Climate Change. I did that from memory, so I hope it's correct.
Okay, good. No, that was some great coverage there. Thank you very much. And it just shows, this is part of the reason that this energy transition is really transitioning as quickly as it is, right? Because we really have to pay attention and move things forward in a positive direction sooner rather than later.
Really good.
So I will cover off my first article. It is by the CNBC, and it is titled "Why a California City is Trying to Build the State's Last Fossil-Fueled Power Plant." And like typical me, I have things printed, so I will refer to the printed material. So basically, Glendale, so a Los Angeles suburb that's home to Walt Disney, they could be the last city in California to build a fossil-fueled power plant. They propose to spend $260 million on 5 new natural gas powered generators that will produce about 93 megawatts at the Glacial power plant, which is enough to power a mid-sized city. And the decision comes after the state passed legislation requiring 100% clean energy by 2045. So this is kind of why it's such sort of a big news story out there. But they're arguing that its proposed thermal generation would only run at about 14% capacity, significantly less polluting than the gas engines that are in place now, and they will provide vital backup power for the city. The new generators will provide power in the event that transmission lines are shut down to mitigate wildfire risk, as well as supply air conditioning during unbearable heat waves. And of course, there's a number of people that are completely against this from an environmental perspective, just because of the fact that, they're burning more fuel, period. Of course, the city of Glendale is suggesting, well, natural gas is sort of a bridging fuel, and so we shouldn't really be kind of, dismissing this so quickly. And they're suggesting, and this is the part of the article that I really gravitated towards, that they're arguing that the utility will eventually be able to run the units on green hydrogen, which of course is made from electrolysis, as many of our listeners who are avid listeners at least know, because we've spoken about hydrogen quite a bit. Electrolysis of water powered by solar or wind that is still in its infant stage in this particular case, but it doesn't have to be by solar or wind. Of course, that's green hydrogen. But I think that, to me, is the essence of the article, right? Like, if we think about most people out there, when we think about clean energy, we always think about solar PV, we think about wind. It's very easy to understand. And then, somebody throws in natural gas fired generation, and they automatically just, think about this dirty fuel, right? And we've been doing this in Ontario as well, as it relates to CHP facilities. But there's this, added benefit, first of all, of the resiliency that these types of power plants can provide to the grid. Texas is a great example of what happened in February 2021, considering the grid is very renewable. And then again, they're not thinking about the green fuels that could be provided or fueling these types of power generation assets. My mother actually is to blame, so if she's listening, because she does sometimes listen to the show. She sent me an article from, I think it was from French magazine. Chatelaine is what she reads. She's from Quebec City originally. So anyway, she sent me this article a couple of weeks ago, and I said, I have to talk about this on Energy Roundtable. And it was basically talking about the differences between what are they called now? Induction stoves and natural gas stoves, and the fact that people should all be scrapping natural gas stoves because they're headed in the wrong direction from a climate perspective, and because of the emissions that are associated with it. And they were talking, yes, a little bit about indoor emissions, but they were really starting to hone in on the fuel use and how dirty natural gas is. And yet there's renewable natural gas in the pipeline today. There's a lot more coming, and yet people again are depending on what people are reading in the media, really limit themselves to believing and taking a side as to what they believe is clean energy. So anyways, I thought it was a good article in terms of shedding some light on why California is doing this. And I was glad that they were talking at least about hydrogen and showing the positive effects of a green fuel.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting article too. I'm glad you picked that one.
Oh, you read it ahead of time. I don't even read Matt's articles ahead of time.
Oh, really? Oops. Am I not allowed to do that?
That's good. That's good.
There was the one quote from there's a guy, Byron Chan, that they quoted. He was an attorney for the environmental law firm,
Yep.
And he said, he had this one quote, he said, there are clean energy options that are decreasing in price and becoming more and more readily available, which is a really good point, right? Like that's a point for the other side in this case. And I thought both sides had some good points here. But what's interesting about that is that he's right in that statement, but the Mark Young, who was the guy who was quoted from Glendale Water and Power, he's just saying that he needs a reliable backup. So he's basically saying, presumably if one of these clean energy options that was mentioned, or none of them was actually mentioned specifically, but if one of these meets the criterion that he's talking about, which is reliability, it sounds like he would jump at it. But nothing was presented.
Yeah.
Right. So there's no solution was presented. That doesn't mean there isn't one, but the article doesn't talk it, and I don't know that law firm ever actually came up with it. But anyway, yeah, it was a really, really cool article.
Well, I have to say I'm very impressed because I don't think Matt reads my articles and I don't read his ahead of time.
I'm not trying to break the rules.
So that's good. Thank you for coming extremely prepared, Bill. Appreciate it. All right, and you have another article, I believe, right?
I do. So start out the right way. This is from Wired, and the headline is "Sea level rise will be catastrophic and unequal." And you can see where this one is going. I chose this one because it actually piggybacks onto the other IPCC one. In fact, some of the data that was used for this was taken from the last one from part one in August. Now, this is a report from a bunch of U.S. government agencies that includes NASA and NOAA, NOAA, and USGS. And it's regarding the sea level rise and the effect in the U.S. Now, it's different than what I've seen before, and that's why I wanted to talk about it real quick, because it's just something I hadn't seen before. And basically, like I said, they took the findings from the previous release about sea level worldwide. The sea level is expected to rise by 1 foot by 2050. And that's alarming because that's as much as the sea level rose for the entire previous century. So
wow.
Yeah, right. So, and then they're thinking if they go forward by 2100, they're thinking it could be 2 feet. And that's if we take measures. If we don't do anything, it could be as high as 7 feet. It doesn't even make sense to me in my mind.
Wow.
So, but what the article was really about is that it's not just as simple as water level rising. There are a couple of matters that actually make this worse. And these are subsidence and the characteristics of the water itself. Now, subsidence that's basically where the ground collapses in on itself. So effectively, you have the ground is sinking. So the sea level rise itself is not the same everywhere, and this is a part I wasn't really thinking of. This is new to me. And they gave the example of on the Gulf Coast, say Texas. This happens from oil and water extraction mostly, and they said by 2050 Texas would be more like 10 feet, or sorry, 2 feet. Not 10. I had 10 in my mind because they talked about Baytown specifically, where they said so it's even different within Texas, but Texas as a whole on the coast would be the actual elevation difference, not elevation, sea level difference would be 2 feet because it's the 1 foot by 2050 like the rest of the world, and then an extra foot because of this subsidence. And then they gave in contrast, again, something I didn't know, they gave in contrast Anchorage, Alaska. It's actually rising. And the reason is because of climate change, because they have a decrease in glacier pressure. It's called glacial isostatic adjustment. And I didn't know this term before. And basically, they're saying by 2050, it's estimated that overall, with the two factors conflicting, that would actually be 8 inches higher in Anchorage. So they would actually go the other way, which I thought was really interesting. So the other part to this was the water characteristics that I mentioned, and they just wanted to note that, this just isn't about glaciers and ice melting. Water itself also expands. Obviously, the density changes as the temperature rises, and this is the part I didn't know. This is expected to account for about half of the rise. It's just that expansion, right? It's not just the melt. And what's going to happen because of that? Well, they're thinking moderately destructive flooding will happen 10 times more frequently because of this by 2050. Highly destructive flooding will happen 5 times as much. Not sure what those thresholds really mean, but moderately and highly, and then they also just mentioned about how hurricanes would be more destructive if you have more water, higher sea level, which totally makes sense because they're bringing in more water. To the land.
And sorry, Bill, this is all if we still take measures to reduce climate change, correct?
Yes.
Wow. Why are
Yeah.
you bringing so much negativity to the show
I
today?
apologize. In the future, I'll be much more cheerier, but better, much more cheerier topics. And so basically, the next part is what's the fix to this? Well, of course, the first thing is that we have to limit greenhouse gas emissions. They talked about seawalls. They can help some, but they won't be enough because these are massive projects, cost a lot of money, and there's not really consensus on whether or not they're all that helpful.
Yeah.
And this leads into another major issue that comes into climate change discussion, any climate change discussion, and that is that this will disproportionately affect the poor. If you deflect that water from your community using this extremely expensive seawall, where does that water end up? Well, probably at the community that couldn't build one, right? So that's a problem. Now, there are these hybrid solutions that they talk about that some communities are looking at, and these are a combination of seawalls, but also more natural solutions. You probably heard this one, wetlands and mangrove forests, because these absorb seawater, so we're looking at that. I guess one sort of positive that they were talking about is this new satellites that are coming online right about now that can more accurately measure the height at the coastline, so we can keep an eye on that. And the article itself, if you want to give it a read sometime, is kind of neat because they give an interesting map that was part of the report that shows the predicted water level difference at various parts. It's mostly in the U.S., positive or negative, but by color codes you can immediately see if it's going to be a positive or a negative in the long run. So there you go. I thought that was pretty interesting. Check it out.
Yeah, very interesting. Not the greatest news, I will admit. But having said that, I mean, if we look at, I can't remember what the difference was between kind of the the water level if you actually are doing something about climate change versus not. But like that was a substantial difference, right? So it just showcases that we have to do something, especially as it relates to what's that?
I was going to say it was 2 versus 7.
Wow,
Yeah,
2 versus
right.
7. What an unbelievable difference in number, right?
Like, can you imagine the damage from 7 feet? Anyway.
Oh, yeah.
That's across the planet.
Yeah, I know, that's crazy. And when you think about all the natural disasters that we see and we have seen and people have reported even over the last 2 years, which I think has driven a lot of why the change has happened so fast now in terms of this energy transition, which is fantastic. But like the fires, the hurricanes, tornadoes, all of these natural disasters, it's all, stemming out of this. So anyways, good article. Okay, so this is my last one. It is from today's Toronto Star, the paper that I get delivered to my house every morning, because I am old-fashioned and do read the paper still in paper form. I should switch to electronic, but it's one of those things. Anyways, the article title is TD to cut emissions intensity from loans. And so the Toronto Dominion Bank, or TD, set targets for reducing emissions intensity of lending to certain energy industries, charting a clear path for a plan to reach net zero emissions by 2050, while still boosting its loan book in those sectors. So this is for lending, for example, to oil, gas, and coal producers. TD is targeting a 29% reduction in a metric called financed emissions lending intensity from 2019 levels by 2030. And for its lending to power generators, TD is planning for a 58% decline in physical emissions intensity from 2019 levels by 2030. So TD and a number of other banks actually have set these targets that are in line with the International Energy Agency's net zero emissions by 2050, which I think is great. Many of these financial institutions are starting to pledge low carbon footprints. They're trying to engage and supporting this sort of general lead in transitioning to a low carbon world, which is fantastic. However, the one piece that I will suggest we have to sort of be a little bit wary of is how these baselines are being determined by a lot of these different financial institutions, because emissions data is not necessarily very complete, or in some cases very inconsistent in some areas of their business. So the financial institutions are struggling a little bit with this. And so I think it's bold and great of them to have set, these aggressive targets. It will obviously limit the number of projects that they're going to be funding or lending towards that are, contributing to GHG emissions, which is fantastic. But just understanding what that baseline looks like and setting that so that they can progress towards the 2050 carbon neutral goal is really what the big challenge is about with most of those financial institutions today.
That was great. I thought that was an interesting article. I had to read it twice because I was having a hard time really figuring out what they were saying. And I'd love to see some more detail on, because what they didn't talk about, they kind of went over what that metric was, yep, and components that made it up, which was good. But I'd have no idea what their internal processes look like to make this happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's I think part of the challenge that not just TD but a lot of these financial institutions are having, right? Because they're trying to establish this baseline. They've got this path forward, but what does that look like internally from an accounting perspective, and how do they evaluate projects? And I think there's still a lot that needs to come out and be fleshed out there that they haven't necessarily talked about, or maybe they have and I'm just not aware of it. Right. But the overall concept I think is good. So
yeah, very good.
Good. Well, we will invite Mark back on for our face-off topic today.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen.
Hello there. How you doing, Mark?
How's everybody doing? I'm well, thanks. You guys?
Good.
Bill, how are you enjoying it so far?
Have you been enjoying this, Mark, with a different face on the screen? And
yeah, it's nice. It's nice to mix it up a bit, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah. Bill's doing well.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah, so far I'm loving it. I mean, these are subjects I'm interested in, and working with you two is always fun. So
that's great. The best part, I imagine, right?
For sure.
So, as you know, Face-Off, I pit you both against each other, friendly, of course. Pros and cons of mainstream media is our topic for today. Clearly, it's a polarizing subject, especially these days with the way everything is. It seems like everything's out of control these days. It's funny, even searching for articles on energy news, I can find 100 negative ones before I can find a positive one. There's something that's, so you got to dig. So I thought this would be an interesting topic to sort of touch on. So, so heads or tails? Bill, you're the newcomer. I'll let you choose heads or tails.
Everyone knows it's always heads.
Okay.
Oh, so you take that. So you're like me, Bill. See, we're much more alike than I even thought.
So you're going to take heads?
Yes, I'm taking heads.
All right. Let's see what we got here. It's actually heads.
Oh.
So, Bill, would you like the pros or cons?
Oh, it's a tough one. I got so much to say on this topic. I'm going to keep it short, but I'm going to take. I'll take pro.
Okay, so you're pro mainstream media, and then would you like to go first, or would you like to go second?
I'll go first. I know it's usually best to go second, but this is friendly, so it's fine.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you.
I'll go first. Okay.
All right.
Just jump into it. Okay.
Yeah, fire away.
All right. So I guess I would start with, we're talking about mainstream media here. Journalism, this is really important. It's absolutely essential for a free society to operate. We have to know what our leaders are up to. As everybody probably knows here, media literacy is very low across the world, not just here. People are not armed with the skills that they need to differentiate fact from fiction. It's just true. The mainstream media is needed because these are outfits that have both journalistic standards and they actually have a reputation that they need to maintain. If you take a site like, and it's kind of mean to pick one, but I'm going to, InfoWars, for instance. This is not a site that cares about either of those things. They don't care about journalistic standards. They don't care about reputation, right? But we need the companies that do.
What do you mean, Bill? What do you mean? I got integrity.
That's pretty good.
Sorry to take you off topic there.
I won't say his name, but that is the host. Yeah. Very good, very good. Right now, misinformation and even worse, conspiracy theories themselves they're a real problem right now in our society. Mainstream media, along with media literacy, basic critical thinking skills, these are the remedy to this problem. We have to have something reliable and trustworthy to turn to when we have a source that's interesting, but its credibility is uncertain. If you see something that pops up over and over again in alternative or independent media, but it's not in the mainstream media, well, why is that? Why is that happening? Are we talking about something that's definitely true? but the mainstream doesn't want you to know about it. When does this happen? Basically never. That's just not usually how it works out. The mainstream media isn't reporting it, most likely, because they can't verify it. So you got to ask yourself, is the trust that mainstream media enjoys right now, is it justified? And I would say the answer is yes. They earned it by doing this great job for decades. And how do they do this? They do this by keeping each other in check, exactly like scientists do. They have to keep this standard high. And most importantly, in my mind, and this is the same with the parallel with science, they completely eat each other alive when they mess up, which is exactly what we need them to do. So in my mind, it's extremely important that we insist on integrity in journalism. It's a fundamental cornerstone of democracy and our way of life. We need the systems, the checks and balances, and we need that credibility that's brought by mainstream media to achieve this. So yes, I'm pro mainstream media. Go mainstream media. Thank you.
Well, that was well put. Lisa, how are you feeling about that?
Well, I'm always nervous to go up against Bill. Not that I'm not nervous to go against Matt, but Bill is a great debater. So anyways, I was hoping that Matt was going to be taking my seat for this piece today, but I will do my best. Okay. So to start off with, I think if we look back in history, news media, major news, mainstream media, however you want to phrase it, they did a really good job of making sure that news was accurate. But I think that, over the years, people are less concerned, or they are less concerned about the facts, and they're a lot more concerned about their ratings these days. So what does that do? It can manipulate the minds of people. COVID is a really good example, right? Like if we think about a mainstream media channel like something like Facebook, and depending on what everybody's stance is on the vaccination piece, we won't get into that in today's show. But, you had so much news and information that was falsified there, that wasn't accurate. And I think that is really the biggest issue and challenge with mainstream media today. I agree with everything that Bill said in terms of, reaching people quickly and the fact that it's important and we need to do that. But if the facts are not facts, then you and I, as listeners who are absorbing this content at such a fast rate, who are on our phones every single day, are going to likely turn to that and think automatically that it is a fact when it might actually not be. So we rely on it for these news sources, and we're not necessarily questioning where the facts are coming from. So that's definitely a big issue. I think a lot of these corporations are also just often kind of posting or trying to focus on things that people really want to hear about. And this could actually be, there's a piece where people are not actually hearing about other important facts or news from other areas of the world that I think would otherwise be, should be covered. Look at my paper every morning when it arrives. At some point during COVID, it was all about COVID, right? Or it's, and don't get me wrong, I like the coverage, and I think the coverage between the Ukraine, and Russia is very important. But look, our papers today are filled with that, right? If it's something else that's going on, it's filled with that. Yet we could be missing out on some really other important news that we're just not capturing on that kind of daily basis. The other big con is, I think, addiction. Look, like we all carry phones in our pockets, and whether it's Facebook or CNN or CTV or whatever news medium we like to choose, we're addicted to it. And that can be, obviously detrimental to our mental health, and focusing on something that's very negative that's going on in the world consistently obviously can affect us on the daily. So that's a big issue. It's also very hard for children to tune out, some of the news that's being focused on, and some of the that's in some ways inappropriate, right? Like some of the images, you sit down and, 6 o'clock news is probably a good example because my daughter's still awake, who's 19 months, and she's looking at the news channel, and there's, kind of gory content in some cases that's starting to come up on the TV these days. And so again, you can't really filter that. It's a little bit harder. Yes, you can turn your TV off, but that can be a bit of a problem. And I think the other big issue, this will be my last one, is that it can negatively affect our youth as it relates to this general feeling of fitting in. You look at these, broadcasters and different people that are out there, depending on the media that they're focusing on. There's body image issues. There's, a feeling of generally, the confidence piece in terms of not being able to fit in. You got lots of Botox and facial surgeries and everything else that, is going on there that's making people look really good. And they compare themselves and say, hey, I don't look like that news reporter, or I don't look like this person that they're focusing on that might be a celebrity on, again, mainstream media. And that can affect our youth. So I will end my point with that, Mark.
Wow, I love the different the different takes that you guys took it. It was completely different than what I thought you guys were going to say, which is great.
I don't know if you noticed, but like halfway through, I was running out of breath because I'm like, oh, one of those pregnancy symptoms at the end. It's like, oh my goodness, I have to breathe.
Yeah, for me, the way I look at it too is you could watch, two topics being covered from two separate media outlets, and they're completely different. Not completely different in the sense that, like, the information is still there, but their take on it is completely different. So I just wish that there was one channel you could go to that was completely neutral and just reported it as, it's actually happening, rather than trying to, sway their viewers, right, or their left or right, or however you want to phrase it, right? So. Right. Oh man, this is tough because I've I give it to the newcomer. I think sorry, man. Lisa. I don't want to leave you on a bad note because there was a lot of stuff he said I agree with as well. But Bill, I think he roped me in. So I do agree. We need the news outlets, and like I said, I just wish there was more neutral reporting rather than to put their advertisers footing the bill for this report, right?
Yeah,
that's all.
So I will say, Bill, just keep up the good work because you need to beat out Matt the next time. I will be listening in to our energy roundtable.
I can't handle.
Since I am on a losing streak officially.
Well, and I'm sorry because, like I said, there was a lot that you said that I agree with too, and you took it in a whole different direction. But so I like that. That was really good.
No worries. Well, this was fun, Bill. I really hope you enjoyed. Our listeners, I hope you guys enjoyed as well. Bill will be taking over my spot over the next couple of months. So welcome, Bill, to the show once again, and keep beating Matt out.
I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me. I had a really good time.
Good. I'm very happy to hear that. So thank you very much again to our listeners. This was Energy Roundtable. Thank you to Bill for taking over my spot over the next couple of months. And a big thank you to Mark, as always, for the Faceoff topic and making us sound good. And we'll be back here next week, but this time with between Bill and Matt.